Graham Dugoni is an entrepreneur and CEO of Yondr, a company he founded in 2014 that pioneered the concept of phone-free spaces through building products that help creativity and productivity flourish. Today, Yondr is the established industry leader in helping educators, artists, families, organizations, and businesses all around the world create phone-free spaces of their own. Thank you so much, Graham, for your time today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
So, my first question is a philosophical one. Why do we need phone free spaces?
Well, I think that with every radically new technological development, it takes a while for society to catch up and figure out how to integrate it into our collective and individual lives in a way that serves us rather than diminishes us. And I think 10 years ago when I started the company, my perception then and still today is that smartphone and the internet are radically new technological developments, and they would bring forth a lot of unprecedented opportunities, but also a lot of unanticipated consequences. So for me, creating phone-free spaces is really an opportunity to give people a choice, especially for young people who are digital natives, to say the digital world is here and it's not going away, but it's something different than the physical world around you. And I thought it was really important for people, as we're trying to find that balance in our lives, that they have a space they can go where you're temporarily removed from the constant kind of tug and pull of our modern hyper connected lifestyles. You can feel what that's like, so that as especially young people get older, they have that experience and they can make those choices for themselves.
Yeah, I'm so glad you emphasized digital natives because that is, I can't imagine growing up in a world where you don't know anything different. But to your point, they need help in a way to create these spaces where they can flourish, like what Yonder talks about. So my next question has to do with a little bit more touching on young people and what's called the collective action problem. So Jonathan Haidt, who is the author of The Anxious Generation, he talks about the collective action problem amongst others, but this refers to this idea that even if a young person wants to put their smartphone down and be present in the real world, they can't because everyone else is on it. So let's jump to schools here. How can schools help solve this collective action problem that we've touched on a little bit already?
Well, that's something we have a lot of experience. Again, when I started the company 10 years ago and I was talking to people and teachers and parents about phone free spaces and phone free schools, a lot of people looked at me like I was crazy because the zeitgeist at the time was so different. There was not the general awareness that there is now. But in the early days, a lot of teachers would reach out to us and say, I'm trying to create a phone free or distraction free learning environment for my students. And we would work with them at a classroom level. And we found really quickly that did not work very well because it still had um, phones were still omnipresent, and students were thinking about them in passing periods and at lunch and all these different times. And teachers were in the uncomfortable position of kind of being the phone police and having those negative interactions with students. So, what we found in 10 years of doing this is that the more effective approach is to create a phone free school day for kids and give them a break really from beginning to end. And what you find in terms of collective action is once all students are in the same boat,
Yeah.
and they realize that this is not a punishment, that a home free school is giving them something, a sense of freedom and exploration, and a sense of relief from the digital world, that makes it much easier because they're all in the same boat. No one's missing out on anything. And if everyone's finished with their work for the day and they're looking around, they're more likely to talk. And then conversations are struck and things happen that are very organic. So again, to me, it's about placing physical boundaries and defining spaces and creating etiquette around a really nebulous, difficult issue that all society in the developed world is wrestling with.
Yeah. And for young people, school is the one place where we can so easily create that structure, right? And so that it's not the individual working against the entire system, right? I mean, isn't that the beauty of the school sort of taking the lead on this?
It is, except that I think, again, in our experience, and we've helped create phone free schools all over the world. We work in 27 different countries and all 50 states and been doing this a long time. I think one thing that's important to note is it is a community issue. It has to be addressed kind of at a community level. So when we work with school districts, the first thing we do is we help them talk to their community about the issue because It touches on parents and teachers and students and administrators. So in a way, it is simple, but another way, it's complicated because you're addressing these deep patterns and things that have become normalized very quickly in society, and kind of unwinding a few of those to reset expectations, to create the space that's going to be conducive to learning and social development for young people.
Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned you came up with the idea for Yondr in 2012, which is pretty amazing because that was really the start of when tech really started to supercharge around that time. Mobile screen technology in particular was starting to hit its stride. So some of those milestones included like the front-facing camera, streaming video, the launch of Curation AI. Those all happened kind of right around that time. In 2011, 23% of teens had smartphones, and that exploded to 73% by 2015. So it happened so quickly. So how do you think that the rapid rise of technologies has affected adolescents in particular, which is the group we're talking about for schools for the most part?
Well, I think it's had a tremendous effect. I think what I thought at the already in 2012 and up through 2014 as I started the company was looking at the way people were changing and social spaces were changing and patterns of communication were changing. My jumping off point was, have people changed as quickly, or have the tools we use changed? And it was very easy for me to think that the tools we were using changed. Um, so I think the effect has been dramatic. It depends on your view of technology in general. To me, I guess social platforms and a lot of these things, the tech world maybe looks at them as progress, and I see them more as a path of least resistance.
Yeah.
This march towards kind of efficiency in all aspects of our life. And so it just so happened that at the time I started the company, the things I was interested in, the things I was reading, um, I kind of synthesized and applied to the modern world because people have been talking about and thinking about the issues of technology for hundreds of years. Um, they just hadn't, I thought people in Silicon Valley hadn't taken those ideas and kind of applied them to new developments in the digital age. But for young people, I think, look, there's things happening at the level of kind of your nervous system. I think one thing people don't realize is that technology is a physical effect on people, and it patterns your nervous system and your modes of perception. So if you watch a young person texting, it becomes clear that the thought they're thinking is not really complete until the text has been sent. And that learning on the internet is very different than building a structure of knowledge in your mind. Um, Going to a library and searching things out based on degrees and how they're associated. The internet's very flat, and so things like information kind of retrieval are very different than critical thinking faculties, and that's something I think a lot about for young people. Um, but there are other more profound effects, I think, in terms of just the way students develop an identity, the way they relate to the world, the way they pass through experiences and how they frame them. It's much easier to text someone or call them than it is to sit in front of them and sometimes pass through the awkwardness of a social interaction, especially as you're going through your high school years. But those are really critical experiences, and you have to go through those. But I don't blame young people for it because they don't know any different. And also, the tools around them in a school setting or even in the public sphere make it very difficult to be intimate or to express yourself because there's always a fear of being recorded and posted to the internet, which leads to a deep existential dread, which is completely understandable.
Yeah. Well, let's push on that a little bit because that leads to my next question, actually. So, in the real world, kids learn and they gain experience from making mistakes, right? In small groups, you just mentioned that. And those are pretty low stakes, right? Make a mistake around your friends, it's we're probably gonna move on pretty quickly. But in the virtual world, these small mistakes can have huge consequences because of the exposure to like a widespread criticism from a huge audience. So, how does the phone free movement help young people who are living under this intense scrutiny?
I think it creates a space where you have freedom. You have freedom to express yourself and know that what is happening in the school and the experiences you have will happen there and they'll pass and they don't live on the internet forever. It's difficult, I think, for a lot of people to conceive how hard that is for anybody to walk through life knowing that any interaction, any remark, anything you do, any awkward dance at a school,
Yeah.
event could show up on the internet and be there forever. That's a paralyzing effect on social interaction in the public sphere. And it's the same for shows. And that's why we try to provide artists with and fans with that platform where you go to a show and what happens there is for you and the people who are there to experience with you. There's a privacy component that's absolutely critical to me in terms of social interaction, but also there's just the experience of being fully present, the sense that everyone is fully there. I think it's a misconception to think that at a show or in other walks of life, you can kind of pull out of an experience and document it and then jump right back into it and everything is the same. To me, if you do that or you have many people in a situation doing that, the situation is constantly changing. It never goes back to what it was, and it's not able to kind of build and flower into a special moment. So it's critical, and it just shows how I think technology has a way of kind of cutting into all aspects of life. And maybe the task of modern society is to try to figure out what does it give us, and in certain contexts, what does it take away, and how do we frame those different needs and experiences so that they're beneficial.
Yeah, that's so true. Okay, well, my next question has to do with something you brought up in the very beginning, which when you talked about speaking with the schools and how the teachers were having a hard time policing and everything else. So, Dr. Anna Lemke, who is the author of Dopamine Nation, she talks about this idea of self-finding strategies. I don't know if she came up with the term or if it's a common one, but it's basically a barrier between yourself and any addictive substance. So, and then just going back to teens for a second, they're checking their phones 100 times a day. And a quarter of them are saying they're online, quote, almost constantly. So, why do adolescents need self finding strategies to have a healthy relationship with technology?
Yeah, I think it might not just be adolescents, to be
Yeah.
honest. I guess, again, our approach is that it's not to be punitive in any way and to
Yeah.
remind people and to give them a sense that when you're in a phone free space and Yondr's there, that there's a sense of freedom and empowerment and exploration that comes with it. But again, if you read the white papers that have come out of Silicon Valley for 10, 15 years, it's no secret that devices are built to do what they do and to be, to capture people's attention. And we're hypervisual animals, and it's a blinking screen that vibrates. I mean, it ties in with your nervous system and solicits certain responses. So what I notice at shows, but also at schools, is with Yonder is that a student has a reflex and they reach for their phone, whether it's
Yeah.
in an awkward moment or it's just purely out of habit or they feel something, a phantom vibration. And when their hand touches the pouch, they remember that they're inside of a phone free space and you interrupt the impulse.
Hmm.
And to me, that's a foundational way if you're helping trying to create new habits. I didn't know that term when I started the company, but I think my line of thought was probably very similar.
Yeah.
Because you have to approach things in terms of habits and structure. I think it's not enough to just talk to people and try to use explanation when something's operating at a level that is very physical.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, research, you know this, I know, but research shows that just the presence of a smartphone is distracting. Like, in school, if we're talking about if it's even in a backpack or in a locker, just knowing that you can get to it is shown to be distracting, first of all. But to your point, having that pouch is going to stop that compulsion loop, is the term for it, right? Where, like you said, you hear a buzz, you pick it up, you go into the loop that you're going to go into. So that's why something physical, and you talked about this too, that there's a physical connection to technology, right? So like a physical barrier is important because if a student knows that they can get to it, it's going to be distracting. Like you said, they're going to be thinking about it. I can't remember who it might have been Sherry Turkle coined this idea of we are forever elsewhere. I don't know if you've heard that before, but it reminds me of what we're talking about now, where if you have that pouch, that physical boundary that's telling you I can't get to this if I wanted to, pretty soon your brain will break that habit pretty quickly. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and it's incredible to watch with students and with adults. It only takes 5 or 10 minutes inside of a show or in a school, and and people adjust very quickly, and then they're
Yeah.
back talking, and lunchrooms are loud again. It doesn't take much, but it is that you do need something, a bit of structure and a boost to get there.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about smartphones in schools. It's now widely documented that smartphones in schools have negatively affected both social connections and academics and students. According to a 2024 Pew poll, 72% of US high school teachers say cell phone distractions a major problem in the classroom. And studies show that, again, like I said, the mere presence of a smartphone is shown to be distracting. So, what are the key benefits? I know you've covered some already that you've seen from schools that have gone truly phone free with Yondr.
Yeah, I mean the results are dramatic and they're fast. I think the top ones that come to mind are improved academic performance among students, radically decreased disciplinary issues,
Mm-hmm.
fights, because that's a huge issue on school campuses, is fights being recorded and orchestrated through social media. Um, a huge uptick in student engagement, and then overall just the atmosphere in the school completely changing. We hear all the time from teachers and principals that after just a week, students, their body language and their posture changes, their eye contact, the way they're talking to each other, the noise levels in the lunchroom in a positive way of students interacting and talking with each other. And then at the student level, what we hear is initial reluctance from students, which is expected,
Yeah.
but very quickly afterwards, a sense of relief, in a sense that maybe a lot of their anxiety or stress is bound up in the phone and the things that are coming through that, and a sense of relief that they don't have to keep up with social media and they have the freedom to just relax and be kids for a while, which
Yeah.
is, makes me very happy because that's the mission of our company, is to try to lay down for this younger generation the opportunity to experience the way an older generation walk through the world so they can make their own choices.
Yeah. Yeah, it's what you were talking about is this term called nomophobia. So there's a flip side of it. 85 to 99% of students are nervous or anxious when they don't have their digital devices, yet 74% say they feel happier without them. So that's kind of what you're talking about. Like at first there's like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? But very quickly they adjust. So that's amazing that you're continuing to hear those stories, because I'm hearing the same stories from the schools that I speak to as well. Let's talk about pushback a little bit, because you touched on that in your last answer. So it's, let's be honest, it's usually the parents that are the ones that are typically pushing back on phone free policies, and they're saying it's due to emergencies. Security experts agree that phones are not helpful in a true emergency. They're loud, they're distracting, they breed misinformation. And elephant in the room, we're really talking about school shootings. The odds of that are 1 in 5 million compared to 1 in 4 for depression, 1 in 5 for anxiety. So, what would you say to parents that are pushing back on this idea of phone free schools?
Yeah, well, the first thing I would say is the landscape there has shifted a lot in the last 10 years of us doing this, and it's now widely recognized that phones, students having phones in a school setting does not make them safer in an emergency situation, but also in the day to day, because um, we're now being brought into a lot of districts by district safety and security officers because they're realizing that a lot of the violence and a lot of things happening on school campuses are coming through the phone. So, as part of creating a safe space for students throughout the day, the idea of creating a phone-free environment is a really important aspect of that. But also, look, as a parent myself, I think I understand that knee-jerk reaction that parents can have. But the reality is, I think that students who are used to communicating with their parents throughout the school day and texting all day maybe don't realize how disruptive that is to the learning environment, what's actually happening in the school. And I think principals and superintendents around the country are doing a terrific job now changing that conversation and renormalizing a little bit what effect that has on the school environment and also what a healthy interaction looks like. And even in emergency response situations, it's now well documented that schools do not want lines being clogged up for first responders and definitely don't want people showing up on site. So these are all things that, again, relate to etiquette and how quickly technology has penetrated every aspect, I think, of modern life. But it's really, really encouraging to see parents asking those questions and then being receptive to hearing from educators about, how important it is to be able to create this space for young people throughout the day and easy ways to navigate around these questions.
Yeah. I mean, it's really all about education, which is like a huge piece of what we're trying to do, right? Because when we hear this in our parent eds, and parents will say things like that, like the emergency, or how do I do pickup? Like, what if the plans change, right? And then when you start talking through the reasons for all of it, I've never had a case where a parent wasn't receptive. When you start talking about the academics, when you start talking about, hey, when you text your kid during the day, just so you know, it takes 23 minutes to get back into the same state of focus. When you start to give them all this information, I think, like you said, it really starts to change that narrative. And this is a brand new societal issue. So parents are adjusting to this as well. But I agree. It's really about the education, and the schools that are doing it the best are using a self-finding strategy like Yondr, which to me is the gold standard, but they're also communicating the reasons why, in a meaningful way. So I think those things are really important. And parents will listen. From what I've heard, it's a small minority that's loud, that tends to push back, but most parents do agree with these policies. I don't know if you've heard the same.
Absolutely. I think it's all about just being open and communicating exactly what the benefits are of a phone-free school,
Yeah.
and but then addressing those concerns and making sure that when a school uses Yondr, they know that their student is not separated from the device. They have access to it. They're going to be able to go unlock it and make a call from the central office if they need to. So
Yeah.
there's answers to all these things that we've learned over 10 years of doing this in every imaginable type of school and community. But it's really important to have an open, honest conversation with parents about it.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about the momentum on the phone free schools movement. I know you guys have been doing this a long time, but I think most people are just starting to wake up to this and sort of see some of the big news that's been coming out lately about it. So counties, states, cities, districts are rolling out policies, and they're citing distraction, which we've talked quite a bit about, and also mental health concerns as the main reasons for their action. So do you think we're at a tipping point for this issue? You guys have been at it since the beginning.
Yeah, I think we're definitely at a tipping point. I think even, to be honest, even before COVID, things were accelerating in this direction. I think COVID kind of hypercharged that because I think so many parents and people became aware of what was happening as they watched young people or themselves be on a screen for 8 to 10 hours a day and what effect that was having on themselves
Yeah.
and the people around them. So I think it's accelerated dramatically, and it's really exciting for us to see now legislation and things moving in a more holistic way, really, really quickly. And we're in the middle of a lot of those conversations because we've been doing this so long. And I think we have a unique perspective on how to do it, and what that kind of collective action actually looks like at a community level.
Hmm.
But I do think that society is kind of coming around to it, and it's not just in education. There's also, we hear about this from artists, from individuals, and the workplace. So it really touches all aspects of modern life.
Yeah. Okay, so my last question is, I would love to hear, I know there's a lot of them, but can you give us your favorite success story from a school that implemented Yondr?
Yeah, I've got a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, I think most recently, I heard from a principal in New York who was about to leave the profession.
Wow.
And we hear this quite a bit. And then reached out to me to say that they were so thrilled to have Yondr in the building. It's something that this past year kept her in the profession because she, at that point, had been around cell phones at a place where she couldn't conceive of a way that the problem could be addressed. It just seems so far gone. And that the introduction of Yondr and Creative Phone Free School has so dramatically shifted the culture at the school and her relationship with her students that now she's happy in her profession again, and the entire school culture has changed. So that's one perspective from a principal. But I always like the student perspective the most at the end of the day because that's our goal. And we hear all the time. The most recent was, I heard from a student who said they were very reluctant at the beginning of school as they passed out pouches. They were nervous, and now after the first month or two of school, they've made more friends than they had the last 2 years combined. And the students are actually talking. They admit that they're more focused in class. And so they're grateful for the opportunity to kind of experience these things and grow up and just be a kid during school. And that is our goal. My goal is to set up this younger generation. It's going to be their decisions that pave the way. It's not for us to tell them what to do. But I thought it was our responsibility to give them the opportunity to experience it so they at least know the difference between the online world and the physical world around them.
Yeah, I love that as well. And I agree. I think you're really just, it's all about the kids. Kids are smart. If you give them the tools, which is what you're doing with the physical binding, they'll get it. They'll know what to do. They'll come back to life. Like you said, the lunchrooms will be noisy again. They know what to do. They're wired to know what to do. So this is just giving them a way to let them do what they do as kids and let them grow and learn and everything else. Um, so, Graham, I really, really appreciate your time. I think you know this, but I come from the brand world, the brand marketing world. And just as a product, it's amazing. It's not only smart, but just the mission of it. Like, I always love aligning with brands that are doing something to help society, right? Like, and just the way you talk about it is so genuine, and you've got all the right principles in mind. So I really love what you're doing, and I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
No, thank you so much for having me. You asked fantastic questions, and I really enjoyed it.
Thanks again.